traders, and let me just set this up just for a second. This is a story of a man in Southeast Asia who wanted to be a famous writer or a notable writer, but it didn't work out. So he's relegated now to running a used bookstall in Southeast Asia. He still has his ambitions to become a famous writer. And then one day he responds to an ad, and I think you've all seen these kinds of ads in literary magazines. I'm working on a biography of this or that author. I'm seeking any remembrances, anecdotes, memories of this particular person. All correspondence welcome. So what this man, Cecil Poe, decides to do is respond to this ad and sort of pass himself off as an acquaintance of this famous writer, as a way of kind of winning himself perhaps a little bit of recognition. And all this goes fairly well until the professor decides to travel from the US to the Southeast Asian nation and interview him face to face, at which point in time Mr. Poe then has to actually kind of invent on the spot a lot of stories about his past with this notable writer. So that's all you know, I think, about this scene. And so it's a two-character scene, actually. Actually, it's two characters. Steve, are you still out there? No, I'm not. I'm good. But anyway, next time. I'm sorry to promise you that. This takes place in an office by the ocean. There's one reference to that, so if there's a water reference, that's what that means. Good, says Professor Mittman. I'd like to begin with some questions about Macklemore's everyday life. I'm analyzing his work using quotidian theory, which studies the habits and thoughts of writers when they're not writing, which essentially is when they are at their most creative. Quotidian analysis examines how they perform their most mundane tasks and errands, what they like to do or don't, and the daily matters that preoccupy them, how they navigate their social reality, so to speak. Since you were a good friend to Macklemore for many years, I'd like to ask you some things about this part of his life. Now, when the professor unloads this on me, suddenly I'm feeling like I'm back in my bookstall, when I was the blur student catching no ball from his speech. Even though all last night I mugged a long list of intriguing recollections of Mr. Macklemore to deliver, now I feel like I crammed all the wrong subjects. What does the professor mean about the social realities? Is he saying he doesn't want my stories? Like when Mr. Macklemore got thrown from the fancy Bangkok restaurant for insulting the Viet general? Or when he saved the import-export man with only the one hand from fighting the communists, who lost his house at the Pai-Gow table, and so had to leave the country until Mr. Macklemore pulled the string? Are these the kind of details not big enough for Professor Mittman's book, or is he not believing me and maybe trying to catch me in the fraudulence? Looking at his red-low face, I'm not getting the clue. So going slow with my words. Ask carefully if he's talking about the kind of theory he studied in school, the one where the scholars stay away from the writer's writings. Well, QA isn't as rigorous as textual annihilation, the professor says with a laugh, like he's admitting the fault. But it can involve some reading of the author's work, and that is one of his main criticisms. But the fundamental principle is the same, which is that only by divorcing ourselves from the actual writing can we understand at all what the writer's trying to say. As a result, QA focuses on the routines, the thoughts, even the simplest opinions of the writers themselves. For example, did Macklemore ever tell you what brands of shirts he liked, or what type of TV shows he watched, or even his thoughts on the local news? Through QA, for example, I'm firmly of the belief that even though none of his writings touch upon the subject of colonialism, Macklemore was a bitter anti-imperialist whose books all take this as their implicit topic and thus refract and give context to his personal conflict over being both the observer and participant in this world historical event. Now I'm stumped even more, since what Mr. Macklemore might have thought of the local affairs, I cannot guess. Truth is, when it comes to such matters, I think most people believe that the less is argued over and the more is forgot about, the better. Although I think, too, that the local leaders spent more time reading the good literary works instead of making speeches over why they should be leading, maybe there would not be so many matters to forget about originally. So instead of replying, I just wait myself to see what he wants to know. Part of me now is wondering if Professor Mittman really plowed any of the drudging books by Mr. Macklemore to get his conclusions. While another half is considering that maybe our discussion is already over and I said too much. But then the professor reaches over and puts his tape machine on the desk. So let's start by discussing Macklemore's day-to-day habits, the things you personally witnessed, he said. This is at the heart of my analysis. You were his guest many times in your life. Can you describe some of his everyday routines? For example, did Macklemore go to bed late? Was he an early riser? Did he like to sleep in? This I can easily reply to, so I state right away. He woke up early, I say, around 7 o'clock, sometimes later. He always went to sleep by midnight. Good, says the professor, that's very important. That matches my understanding of the auroral quality of his my theme. Rarely, in my opinion, is Macklemore's narrative religiously connotational. And on the occasions where it is, it's hard to escape the senseless and ironical usage. Now, based on this, do you remember Macklemore bathed in the morning or at night? Ablutions in the morning, I say decisively. Shave every day? Always, I say, nod strongly. Good. I also did that impression from his work. At times, the intensity of his velocity is overwhelming. Now, did Macklemore read his newspapers before breakfast or during? After breakfast, I say, he never liked to mix words with his food. Ah, that's most intriguing, says Professor Emmett, his voice rising up a notch. And again, perfectly in keeping. For my study, Macklemore always took care to maintain the distinction between his naturist sentiments and his post-nominalistic ones. Very important for him. All right, then, what do you usually drink with breakfast? Coffee or tea? All the time, coffee. Ha! Exactly right. Just what I thought, exclaims the professor. Exactly what I thought. Rejecting the imperial tentacular potables for the native beverology. This comes through clear as day in book after book. He was always adamant on this point. Now, do you take with milk or sugar? Both of them, I say. He liked the sweets. Naturally, says Professor, who then writes this down with a grave face and his burrow scratching the yellow sheets like he started in a long essay. Even from my upside down watching, it just looks like a lot of duck marks with a drawing every once in a while of a rice pot. Overall, he finishes up 4 big pages until he closes his pen and looks up again. And now I see his face is trembling with the powerful exertions, and he starts speaking in a low voice like we're in the Christ Church. This brings me to the very heart of my study, and the one matter that has always been very controversial in regards to Macklemore's work, he said. I believe it defines the entire epistemology of his writing, and so I feel extremely fortunate to be speaking with someone of such an important stature, who has witnessed firsthand his métier. I nod and agree to this about myself. You were Macklemore's trusted friend and guest throughout the years, says the professor. You've sat with him countless times in the morning, exchanging your views, thoughts, and conversations. I imagine you see him in every imaginable situation, from middle age onward. I can't imagine a better person to ask this question to settle this issue. Tell me, what did Macklemore have for breakfast? I act for a moment like I'm recalling the most difficult fact from the deepest earth. I remember his breakfast always started with a juice and toast, I slowly said. Yes, I thought so, said Professor Emmett, and now starts shouting at me and his face is all lit up. Toast is the major theme in all his writing. It displays fully his feelings over colonialism and his contempt for the imperialist order. It's the burning of innocence. Is nothing so innocent as bread? Then what, he asks anxiously after he calms down. I think hard some more and go back in the earth. Then he would have the strawberry jam, I say. The professor's coin eyes get bigger. No, the blood of the conquered. Except sometimes, I say, and stop. I can see Professor Emmett is quivering now like the big balloon ready to pop. Except sometimes he would just skip and just have the oatmeal, I say. The stag is Professor Emmett, and all of a sudden can't talk and just flings himself back in his chair before asking me again. Oatmeal, he croaks, are you sure? Always with the jam, I say with firmness, no sugar. Then I lean back and snatch up some paper and also act like I'm making a purposeful note to myself. Meantime, the professor's moaning like he's waking from the deep dream. Oatmeal, whole grains, husk groats. Who could have thought? Who could have imagined? Never at all would I have suspected, but now, of course, it makes perfect sense. Absolute perfect sense. In fact, it's probably one of our apt descriptions of his narratology. It's his most salient quality. The professor throws himself back in his chair again, and he puts his hands over his long face and beaked nose like he's going to have a big breakdown. Oatmeal, my God. It was always a powerful moment, I say with seriousness. And with the jam and the coffee and the morning shave, it's extraordinary. Don't skip the ablutions, I say. The key to everything, the heart to his work, the breakfast, I knew it, but oats, could have imagined. I wonder he wrote what he did. Such anger, such vision. We both stay silent, respecting my discovery. Outside the window, I see one of the dump boats capsizing all its garbage in the water. The professor is still suffering his attack. Now for lunch, I start after a while. No, that's enough, cries Professor Emmett, and he jumps up like the man with the electrical shock and he weighs me down. No more. We have to stop here. Don't say anything further. What you said is extraordinary enough. It overturns nearly all the conventional thinking on Macklemore, and I need time to digest it. And if it all aligns with what I've long believed about him. We can analyze his lunch, and perhaps even his afternoon snacks later. For now, let's just concentrate on the significance of this event. And then the professor stopped the tape machine. Even though the aircon is still roaring full blast, Professor Emmett is breathing hard like he has just run the 10-mile race, and his sweating and suffering almost seem to be getting worse. And then unfortunately, he stands and holds out his hand, so once more I'm forced to take his wet rag fingers. I'm completely overwhelmed, he said. These have been monumental revelations, far beyond anything I could have hoped. The views and observations of Macklemore paint a completely different picture of how we understand him and his work. Utterly transformative. I think it's safe to say that in one afternoon you've shed more insight into his writing than all the years of scholarship on him combined.